The name of this city is a mistake. It was meant to be Mankato, a Dakota word meaning greenish blue earth, but somewhere in the paperwork the letter H was read as an N, and the error was never corrected. Under that accidental name sits a river town that holds one of the heaviest stories in American history and some of the country's most beautiful building stone. It is a little past 7 on a May morning, and we have about 10.5 miles of city to ride. This is Mankato, Minnesota. We are in south-central Minnesota, roughly 80 miles southwest of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Mankato sits at one of the strangest points on the map of the state, the Great Bend where the Minnesota River stops flowing southeast and swings northeast, back toward the Mississippi. Right at the elbow of that turn, the Blue Earth River comes in from the south. The city grew up inside the bend, wrapped on 2 sides by water. Almost everything in its story begins with that geography. We start at the north end of town, where the state rail trails come in, and work our way down the valley. The morning is cool and the streets are nearly empty, which is the best time to read a city from a bicycle seat. Notice the land on either side of us. Mankato does not sit on the prairie. It sits in a trench cut into the prairie, with wooded bluff walls rising a couple of 100 feet above the rooftops. A river did that, and not the river you can see today. First, the name. The Dakota people, the first inhabitants of this valley, knew this place as Mankato for the greenish blue earth found here. In a shaly layer of the rock bluffs along the Blue Earth River, a few miles from where we are riding, there is a band of bluish-green clay. The Sisseton Dakota used that clay as a pigment, and the color was striking enough to name a river, then a county, and then a city. When white settlers platted their town, they chose the Dakota name, and a slip of handwriting turned Mankato into Mankato for good. Keep those bluff walls in the corner of your eye as we ride, because they are far too big for the river that runs between them. The Minnesota River here is modest, a few hundred feet across in most places. The valley it occupies is enormous, deep and wide, the kind of trench you would expect a great river to need. Geologists call a river like this one underfoot, a small stream living in an oversized house. The house was built by a flood at the end of the Ice Age. When the last ice sheet melted back, an immense body of meltwater called Glacial Lake Agassiz pooled across the north, and it drained south through a channel geologists call Glacial River Warren. Between about 11,700 and 9,400 years ago, that torrent carved the valley we are riding in. It ran southeast across the state, and right here at Mankato, it turned hard toward the northeast and charged on toward the Mississippi. Near this bend, the valley it cut was about 70 meters deep, well over 200 feet. When Agassiz finally drained away, the torrent shrank to the quiet Minnesota River, but the Great Bend stayed. So the shape of this morning's ride was set thousands of years before anyone thought of a town. We drop gradually toward the valley floor, following streets that follow the terraces the old river left behind. Down here the soil is deep and dark, and the water table is close. That combination made this bend a good place to live long before it made a good place to plat. People have been at this river turn for a very long time. For centuries before any town company arrived, this valley was Dakota homeland. The Minnesota River was a highway and a larder, and the meeting of rivers at the bend made this ground a natural gathering place. The Dakota named the landscape precisely, and the survival of Mankato in the city's name is one trace of that long tenure. It is worth holding on to that as we ride, because the hardest part of this city's story is about what happened to the Dakota here. We will come to it down by the riverfront. The town itself begins with a boat ride. These blocks near the river are the oldest part of Mankato, and some of the street names have been here since the beginning. In the summer of 1850, two St. Paul businessmen took a steamboat excursion up the Minnesota River and liked what they saw at the Great Bend. Their names were Parsons King Johnson and Henry Jackson, and they did not forget the spot. Back in St. Paul, Johnson and Jackson organized a town site company of 10 men. By February of 1852, they were here preparing homes for their families, claiming ground near what is now the corner of South 2nd and Hickory Streets. The new town became the seat of Blue Earth County, whose name is the same Dakota name in English translation. The steamboats that brought the founders kept coming, working the shallow, twisting river up from St. Paul. By the late 1860s, they were making hundreds of stops a year at Mankato's Landing. Mankato grew the way frontier river towns did, which is to say all at once. Within a few years of the first claims, the town had a hotel, several stores, 4 churches, a brickyard, a newspaper, a school, and a postal service. It also had 2 stone quarries, and remember those, because stone becomes a main character in this story. Everything moved by water in those first years. The river that named the town also fed it. Picture these streets in the 1850s, stumps still in the ground, board sidewalks, wagons down to the landing whenever a whistle sounded. A steamboat arriving meant mail, lumber, sugar, news, and new neighbors all at once. Mankato quickly became one of the busiest points on the upper Minnesota River. It was a town betting on its location, and the bet was paying. Then, 10 years into its life, the whole valley came apart. We are riding now toward the riverfront and toward the hardest ground in the city. By 1862, the Dakota had been pressed onto a narrow reservation up the Minnesota River, dependent on treaty payments for survival. That summer, the payments were late. The food promised by treaty was withheld, and people were going hungry. In August, war broke out between Dakota fighters and the United States along this valley. It lasted about 6 weeks, and it ended in a way that is bound to this town forever. After the fighting ended, a military commission tried hundreds of Dakota men in proceedings that were brief even by the standards of the day. More than 300 were condemned to death. President Abraham Lincoln personally reviewed the cases and reduced the list to 38 men. The sentence was carried out at Mankato, on a single large scaffold built for the purpose, on the day after Christmas. What happened here remains the largest mass execution in the history of the United States. On the morning of December 26, 1862, an estimated 4,000 spectators crowded the streets of this small town. At 10 o'clock, 38 Dakota men were hanged together, here near the river. Today the site is a quiet green space called Reconciliation Park, and we ride past it slowly. There is no way to pedal casually past a place like this. The city has spent generations learning how to face it. Reconciliation Park was dedicated on September 19, 1997, with the theme Forgive Everyone Everything. At its center stands a buffalo, carved by sculptor Tom Miller from a 67-ton block of local Kasota limestone, a symbol of the spiritual survival of the Dakota people. In 2012, for the 150th year, a memorial scroll was added bearing the names of the executed men. Each December, riders on horseback complete a memorial journey of some 300 miles that ends at this park. Remembrance here is not a plaque, it is a practice. We carry that history with us as the ride continues along the river. It is woven into the ordinary streets in ways that are easy to miss, and one of them is under the buffalo itself. The memorial is cut from Kasota stone, the golden rock this valley is famous for. That stone is the city's oldest industry and its most visible export. To understand it, we have to go down into the quarries. The rock is a dolomitic limestone, laid down on the floor of a shallow sea roughly 450 million years ago. Over ages, magnesium-rich groundwater seeped through it, swapping magnesium for calcium and turning it into dolomite, which is unusually resistant to weather. Quarrying began here almost as soon as the town did, and in 1885 a stone man named T.R. Coughlin arrived, found a site with distinct veins of warm-colored dolomite, and built a company on it. The quarries have been working this valley ever since. The stone comes out of the ground in shades of gold, cream, and pink. Look at the older buildings as we pass, and you will see the local rock everywhere, in churches, storefronts, foundations, and curbs. A town that stands on good stone tends to be built out of it, and Mankato is a clear case. The warm yellow-gray walls you see here were cut from the bluffs a few minutes' ride away, but the stone did not stay local. Kasota stone became one of Minnesota's great architectural exports. The most famous example stands in Washington. The Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, with its flowing curved walls, is clad in Kasota dolomitic limestone from this valley, stone from Dakota homeland wrapped around a museum of native nations. Closer to home, the stone surrounds the ballpark surfaces at Target Field in Minneapolis. It takes a polish, holds its color, and shrugs off frost. A rock that survives a Minnesota winter can survive nearly anything. The path we are riding now follows the technology that ended the steamboat era. In 1870, local officials were pushing hard for a rail line running south from Mankato toward Good Thunder. The southern Minnesota rail line began clearing and grading, and much of the line was built by 1874. Rails did not depend on the river's mood, and the steamboat landings went quiet. For the next century, trains stitched this valley together. The line south of town eventually belonged to the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific, the railroad everyone called the Milwaukee Road. Its trains ran down the Red Jacket Valley, hauling grain and passengers between Mankato and the farm towns. To cross the deep valley of the Le River, the railroad needed serious engineering. In 1911, it built the Red Jacket Trestle, a bridge standing about 80 feet above the water, for the sum of $12,500. It became a landmark the moment it was finished. Railroads rise and railroads fall, and in August of 1978, the Milwaukee Road moved to abandon its line south of Mankato. That raised an urgent question: what would happen to the corridor and its great trestle? A group of citizens formed the Red Jacket Trail Association with a simple idea: keep the line and give it to walkers and cyclists. It took years of work and no small amount of local argument. The cyclists won. In the 1990s, the old grade became the Red Jacket Trail, running about 13 miles from Mankato south to Rapidan. Riders today roll across the 1911 trestle with the Le River far below, on a bridge built for locomotives and inherited by bicycles. Just over a century after the first train came through this valley, the corridor carries wheels of a quieter kind. It is one of the best rail-to-trail conversions in southern Minnesota. And it is why a city ride like ours can slip so easily onto old rails. We climb now into the residential hills, where the houses get older and the streets get steeper. Neighborhoods like these, stacked on the bluff sides above downtown, gave Mankato its most beloved nickname, and it came from a children's book. A girl grew up on these hills in the 1890s, watching the town below from the high ground behind her house. She turned what she saw into one of the most loved series in American children's literature. Maud Hart Lovelace was born in Mankato in 1892 and lived here until 1910, spending her childhood at 333 Center Street. In her Betsy Tacy books, she reimagined Mankato as Deep Valley, a town hemmed in by steep wooded bluffs, which is simply this place described honestly. Betsy was Maud herself, and Tacy was her real best friend, Frances Kenny, who lived across the street. The two childhood homes still stand, kept as a museum by the Betsy Tacy Society. Readers travel from across the country to walk the hill streets they know from the books. From the hills, we drop back toward the river flats, where this city keeps both its oldest park and its hardest lesson. Down at the meeting of the Blue Earth and Minnesota rivers is Sibley Park, bought by the city in 1887, 120 acres at the confluence, and named for Henry Hastings Sibley, the state's first governor. Generations knew it for gardens, a band shell, even a small zoo. But land this close to two rivers lives at the water's mercy. In April of 1965, the water called in the dead. That spring, deep frost, late snow, and heavy April rain sent the Minnesota River to the highest volume ever recorded at Mankato, more than 94,000 cubic feet of water every second. The dikes were believed good for a river of 25 feet, and the crest reached 29. Thousands of people fled their homes along the valley while volunteers sandbagged around the clock. Sibley Park went under, and many of the zoo animals were lost. It was the flood that changed how this city lives with its river. The path under our wheels right now is part of the answer. After 1965, the Army Corps of Engineers built a flood control system on both sides of the river, walls and levees with gates and pumping stations, a project that took decades to complete. Since it was finished, Mankato and North Mankato have been spared serious flooding. The city turned the top of its defenses into a place to walk and ride. It is a rare thing, infrastructure you can enjoy. Above the valley on the other side of town stands the institution that shapes modern Mankato more than any other. It began in 1868 as the Mankato Normal School, the state's second teacher training school, opening in the basement of a Methodist church with a first class of 27 students. Tuition was free for students who pledged to teach in Minnesota for at least 2 years. The school became a teacher's college, then a state college, and by 1979 it had moved from the valley floor to a hilltop campus overlooking the city. Today it is Minnesota State University, Mankato, with more than 15,000 students. And the old transportation story keeps paying dividends for riders like us. The Sakata Singing Hills State Trail runs 39 paved miles from Mankato to Faribault on an abandoned railroad grade, joining the Minnesota River Trail right here in town and passing through Sakata Lake State Park along the way. Add the Red Jacket Trail heading south and the riverfront routes on the flood walls, and Mankato has quietly become a hub where rail history, river history, and bicycles all meet. The corridors that built the town now carry its mornings. That is a good trade. Ten and a half miles and the whole arc of a place, greenish blue earth misspelled into a city, a valley carved by a glacial flood, a river town raised by steamboats and stone, a site of profound grief, held now with remembrance and the long work of reconciliation. Deep valley on the hills, flood walls by the water and old rail lines reborn under bicycle wheels. Mankato is a small city that asks you to pay attention, and it repays every bit of it. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.